Have you ever walked into a hardware store for one thing, then 5 minutes later started pretending you knew exactly what you were looking at? That's when you realize there are 7 different kinds of men in a hardware store. Level 1. The first visit. Every man remembers walking into a hardware store thinking he'd be in and out in 5 minutes. One screw, one bracket, one simple part. Then you turn the corner and suddenly you're standing in front of an entire wall filled with hundreds of nearly identical options. Different sizes, different threads, different materials. You pick one up, put it back, pick up another. Then you start reading random labels, hoping they somehow reveal the answer. And if you've ever quietly hoped an employee wouldn't ask if you needed help, you're not alone. Most people think that feeling comes from not knowing enough about tools. That's the obvious explanation. It's what most of us tell ourselves. But have you ever stopped to wonder why something as small as choosing a screw can suddenly make an otherwise capable person feel uncertain? Maybe it was never really about the screw. Maybe it was your first encounter with visible competence. In school, the teacher already knew you were learning. In a hardware store, nobody knows whether it's your first visit or your 100th. For the first time, knowledge feels public. And that's uncomfortable. Not because we're weak, but because every human being wants to feel capable. That's why your first trip to a hardware store feels much bigger than buying a piece of metal. It's one of the first places many men quietly discover that confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, one unfamiliar experience at a time. And once you stop trying to look competent, you finally become curious enough to learn. That's where the second level begins. Level 2, when curiosity replaces fear. The next few visits feel different. You still don't know everything. You still walk past shelves that make absolutely no sense, but something inside you has changed. Instead of trying to avoid looking lost, you start asking questions. Why are there 5 different kinds of wood glue? Why does one drill cost 5 times more than another? Why would anyone need 30 different screw heads? Years ago, those questions would have embarrassed you. Now, they excite you. Most people assume experience is simply collecting information, but I think something much more interesting is happening. The tools haven't become simpler. The store hasn't changed. You have. The fear of being wrong slowly gives way to the excitement of understanding, and that's a transformation far bigger than hardware. If you think about it, almost every skill in life begins the same way. Driving, cooking, parenting, running a business. The people who improve aren't always the smartest. They're usually the ones willing to stay curious long enough to feel uncomfortable. That's the hidden purpose of beginner stages. They're not there to test your intelligence. They're there to test your humility. Because curiosity can only exist where the ego stops pretending. The moment you become comfortable saying, "I don't know," is often the exact moment you begin learning something worth knowing. Looking back, maybe the hardware store wasn't teaching you about tools at all. Maybe it was quietly teaching you how to learn. And once a man discovers that, he starts walking through those aisles differently, not trying to impress anyone, simply trying to understand. That's when confidence begins to grow. And confidence brings us to the third level. Level 3. Confidence isn't loud. By the third level, something subtle begins to change. You still walk into the same hardware store. The same shelves are there. The same rows of screws, drills, and fittings stretch farther than you can see. But this time, you don't feel the need to prove anything. Years ago, confidence meant looking like you knew what you were doing. Now it means being comfortable admitting when you don't. That's a strange shift, isn't it? Most of us grow up believing confidence is about having all the answers. But watch someone who's genuinely experienced. They don't rush. They don't pretend. They'll spend 10 minutes comparing 2 products, ask an employee for another opinion, or even walk out empty-handed because they're still thinking. Why? Because real confidence isn't built on certainty. It's built on judgment. The inexperienced mind believes speed looks competent. The experienced mind knows that careful decisions save time, money, and frustration later. Have you noticed how the people who know the most are often the least interested in showing it? That's because they've learned something important. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to win every conversation. It doesn't panic when it doesn't know the answer. It simply trusts itself to figure things out. And maybe that's the biggest difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge fills your mind. Wisdom steadies it. That's why the hardware store quietly stops being a place to buy tools. It becomes a place where good decisions are practiced. The man who once feared making the wrong choice now understands that every choice is simply another opportunity to sharpen his judgment. Because confidence isn't about never making mistakes. It's about no longer being afraid of them. And when a man finally trusts his own judgment, responsibility naturally follows. That's where the fourth level begins. Level 4, the weight of responsibility. Eventually, your reason for being there changes. You're no longer buying tools because you're curious. You're buying them because someone is counting on you. Maybe it's your family waiting for the sink to stop leaking. Maybe it's your child whose bike needs fixing before the weekend. Maybe it's a fence that's been broken for weeks, and today is finally the day you're going to repair it. The task doesn't look much different from before. The shelves haven't changed, the tools haven't changed, but you have. When responsibility enters the picture, every decision carries a little more weight. And here's something most people never notice. When the outcome affects only you, it's easy to procrastinate. When someone else depends on you, you suddenly become willing to learn things you once avoided. That's one of adulthood's quiet transformations. Competence isn't always born from ambition. Sometimes it's born from love. Sometimes the reason a man learns how to fix something isn't because he enjoys it. It's because someone he cares about shouldn't have to wait. And honestly, that's one of the reasons I enjoy making these videos. They're never really about hardware stores, garages, or workshops. They're about the ordinary moments that quietly shape who we become without us even noticing. If you've been seeing yourself in these stories, you'll probably enjoy the next ones too. Because once responsibility changes the way you see a tool, another transformation begins. You stop asking whether the job can be finished. You start asking whether it can be done well. Responsibility changes your standards, not because someone is watching, but because someone is depending on you. And that's where the fifth level begins. Level 5. Respect for the craft. Have you ever noticed how some people treat ordinary work almost like an art? They don't grab the first tool they see. They feel the weight, check the grip, compare the finish, not because they're trying to impress anyone, because they've learned that the quality of the result is often decided before the work even begins. At first, that seems excessive. Why spend extra time choosing a tool? Why care about details most people will never notice? Then experience teaches a painful lesson. The cheapest shortcut is rarely the cheapest outcome. The wrong tool damages the material. The rushed measurement wastes the afternoon. The careless decision becomes tomorrow's repair. Slowly, something changes. You begin respecting the process. Not because perfection is possible, but because craftsmanship is a form of attention. It's a decision to care about the things that could easily be ignored. Have you ever noticed that experienced builders often move more slowly than beginners? They're not slower because they know less. They're slower because they understand the consequences. Every careful measurement, every patient adjustment, every extra minute spent preparing. It's an investment in getting the result right the first time. That's when you realize craftsmanship isn't about building beautiful things. It's about becoming the kind of person who refuses to do ordinary work carelessly. Because how you do small things, quietly, shapes how you do everything. And once a man learns to respect the craft, he naturally begins wondering who he can pass it on to. That's where the sixth level begins. Level 6. The man who teaches. At some point, something unexpected happens. You walk into the hardware store, and someone else is standing exactly where you once stood. They're holding 2 different screws, turning them over, reading the labels, quietly hoping nobody notices they have no idea which one to choose. And suddenly, you recognize yourself. Who taught you your first real lesson about fixing something? Maybe it was your father, maybe your grandfather, a patient neighbor, a friend, or maybe no one taught you at all. Maybe you learned because life didn't give you another option. Either way, you've reached a point where your knowledge no longer belongs only to you. And that's one of the quietest signs of maturity. When you're young, you collect knowledge. When you grow, you begin giving it away, because knowledge kept to yourself eventually reaches its limit. Knowledge shared continues long after you've forgotten the lesson. That's why the best builders rarely keep secrets. They explain. They demonstrate. They let someone else struggle just enough to learn while staying close enough to help. They understand something beginners don't. Teaching isn't proof that you've finished learning. It's proof that you've learned enough to shorten someone else's journey. Sometimes the greatest gift a skilled person gives isn't an answer, it's confidence. The confidence to believe that learning is possible. And when a man starts building people instead of simply building projects, he quietly steps into the final level. Level 7. What you leave behind, eventually. The hardware store stops being about you. You no longer walk through the aisles wondering whether you're capable. That question was answered years ago. Now you're thinking about something much bigger. What am I leaving behind? Years from now, what will people actually remember? Will they remember the drill you bought? Probably not. The brand of screws you preferred? Unlikely. But they'll remember the table where birthdays were celebrated, the shelf that never fell, the fence that protected the backyard, the bicycle you repaired instead of replacing, the afternoon you showed a child how to hold a hammer for the very first time. That's the strange thing about tools. They were never the destination. They were always the means. A hammer doesn't build a home. A person does. A saw doesn't create memories. People create memories. The tools simply make those moments possible. Maybe that's the lesson hidden inside every hardware store. We spend so much of life believing we're collecting things, when, in reality, we're collecting opportunities to become someone useful. Because usefulness isn't measured by how much you own. It's measured by how many lives become a little better because you were here. Maybe growing older isn't about knowing every answer. Maybe it's about becoming the kind of person others feel safe asking. Because the greatest builders don't leave behind perfect projects. They leave behind capable people. And perhaps that's the 7th level. Not mastering tools, but mastering yourself. Ending the next time you walk into a hardware store, take a moment to look around. You'll probably see someone standing exactly where you once stood, unsure, curious, trying not to look lost. You might even see someone quietly helping without making them feel small. And in that ordinary moment, you may realize something. There were never 7 different kinds of men in a hardware store. There was only one man, seen at 7 different stages of his journey. So I'll leave you with one final question. Which stage are you living today? And whose journey will be easier because you chose to keep learning? I'll see you in the next one.